Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the SIMGOT or SIMGOT. I'm not sure how they pronounce their name. The EA500. So the EA500 is their new one dynamic driver, and it is the shiny, beautiful build. It says EA500, but all metal build, very solid, very, very nice. Little recessed 2-pin connector there, metal nozzle, nice grill, and on the back you actually get this unique two back vent looking thing there. So one actually has a grill on it, one has a screw in it. For those of you not familiar with this is, that is a Y1 damper filter that I added that we'll talk about a little bit later. But there you go. It is a very, very nice metal build, very polished. It will take fingerprints, as you just noticed. Also comes with removable nozzles, so you get one pair of black and one pair with red, and there's probably a different nozzle filter in each one of those to adjust the sound slightly. Cable is a 2-core SPC looking cable, and it does come with this nice case. So that is the basics. The box has both signatures on the back. I think this is the Harman signature in red, and the thing to notice is actually right there. So this 2 to 4 area kind of cuts across in a straight path. Their house tuning tends to dip down. I think that's about 4K, so you end up with kind of a peak and a little valley and a peak, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So here you go. This is a graph that we've seen lots and lots of times. It's very similar to lots of other sets. Main difference is probably going to be at both ends, kind of out here and here, and we'll see that in the next set. But as I said, the main difference between the nozzles, at least on the graph, is right there. So the red actually cuts across straight. The blue has this little more of an M shape with a dip around, almost at 4K. So I didn't necessarily think there was a huge difference between the two. I think if you use your imagination, you sort of know what that's going to sound like. It didn't really affect the sound stage, and I saw some other people with more wide-ranging impressions on how it changed things, but for me, it was I just stuck with the red. I've tried the black a few times, and I just kind of stuck with the red. So as I said, this is a graph that you've probably looked at a few times on different sets. So here is EA500 red, the black versus Olina SE. And as I said, the main bit that's different is right here and right here. So roll off the sub bass a little bit more on EA500, kind of this leaner, slimmer bass version of that signature. And they've also raised up the extension and the treble level a little bit. So where Olina is almost tilted, downhill, this one is sort of tilted a bit uphill. And I have to sort of say, it sounds a lot like it graphs. EA500 is very similar, but just a little heavier over here and a little lighter over here. And there's an overall brighter sense to it. This, instead of being centered kind of down here, it's more centered over here. And it's just kind of a more treble version of an Olina signature. Whereas Olina was a very balanced, maybe relaxed version of treble, this one bumps it up a little bit. And we'll talk about that about right now. So compared to the Queen, Olina. So I do say they are similar, but not the same. And we just saw it on the graph. Just changing those two bits at either end is going to shift the focus of it, sort of where it's grounded. And I think this one, EA500, sounds like Olina Vivid extended version, right? So they bumped up that high treble a little bit. That adds just a little more treble energy to it. I call it the Vivid version. It's more of an L shape because it's bumped out of there, whereas Olina may be a more neutral version. This one does have a little bit of a bump to it. And as I said, it's just tilted the balance a hair brighter, a hair more female. For those of you who were really into Oxygen and you knew how that affected female vocals, that little bit that some people called fatiguing, other people said it caught female energy right there. It was very, very good on female vocals. That changed a little bit in Olina. Olina kind of smoothed that out, made it into a more balanced, more neutral sound, and a more long session, less fatiguing version, but it lost a little bit about that female energy, and now you kind of get it back. So I was kind of happy to see that. It's kind of an interesting thing. So Metallica's Fade to Black, 53 seconds. So right when those guitars kick in, the new brighter guitars from the beginning of that song, right at 53 seconds, that's a lot of where you hear the difference between Olina and EA500. How they tilted the treble up a little bit to make it a little bit more brighter. The levels just kicked up a little bit, so it's just more present, and it's not as neutral, or I don't know, not as relaxed as I would say. Some people are just gonna listen to it and say it's bumped up a little bit too much. It's not as natural as Olina. I sort of agree with that. People who are really into details and treble are going to say that was a great change. So check out that song. That right at that point, you sort of get an idea of how Olina has those guitars notes. They're very kind of pinpoint and drop down pretty quickly. Energy. There's just a little more energy at the peak, and then dropping down is just more present, more audible on EA500. So not many dynamic drivers have that extension at both ends, clear, open mids, all these things that we talked about with Olina, with Oxygen. EA500 is very similar. No compromises in the mids, and it can really pass for a hybrid with the resolution and detail. That's sort of what separates Olina from the rest of the pack. Why is it the king or the queen at $100? A lot of it is that there's almost no other sets that came close to the performance of that driver. And SIMGOT kind of found another one, and it's shocking and surprising where this driver came from and how no one found it before. Maybe they developed it, but sort of right out of the box, it was pretty clear that this is a very special driver, and it can do things. And as soon as I heard it, I wanted to make it more like Olina, and we'll talk about that in a second. So like Olina, imaging and projection all over your head, behind your head, definitely with nicer sources, clear out to the edges of your hearing. So like I said, they kind of bumped that extension a little bit, so now it's very clear all the way out to as far as you can hear. There's some really shocking amount of detail all the way out there. Supertramps, Take the Long Way Home, a great set to hear a lot of the imaging and projection around your head. Listen to the whole song, not just the beginning. Lots and lots of parts with lots of instruments all around your head. Plays very well on EA500. So as I said, definitely a surprise. Made me deep dive back into my playlist. Not too many sets really do that. But just to hear, a driver that is as capable as Olina with just a little bit more bump to the treble sort of really provoked me to go back and listen to a lot of tracks that I haven't listened to in quite a while. So is it better than Olina SE? I would say stock out of the box, probably not for me. I still, and I kind of, as I was hinting right there, I think Olina is still a hair natural. This one just has a little more treble, and some people are going to always prefer that over the relaxed version of Olina. So, but for me, out of the box, I think I would still go with Olina. But modded, it came super close. And as soon as I heard it, I tried to move it even closer to Olina. And as I said, Olina's just a little more natural to me, and that's just my preference. But the fact that I actually wrote that line and wrote this whole block, that I don't compare anything to Olina unless it's very, very close. And this one is very, very close. And whether you prefer more treble, less bass, that's going to tip you over the edge of, do you go for Olina or EA500? So to mod or not to mod? So like I said, I actually added this little damper right there on the front vent. And what that did is actually sort of bump me. Can we see both of these? Yeah. So the orange line is actually the Y1, the measurement with the Y1. And what I wanted to do is simply move the sub bass closer to this to close this gap. And I sort of understand why they did that. It's just my preference. I would rather have that gap closed and keep the extension of EA500 there. And it's sort of the best of both worlds from both sets. And as soon as I heard EA500, I'm like, I think the bass, this lower level of bass, more maybe Dark Magician style. It's a bit less than Olina, as you can see. That works for some people. For me, I prefer the Olina style bass shelf. I prefer how it catches vocals right there. So as soon as I heard it out of the box, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and Y1 put me right exactly where I wanted it to be. If you don't have Y1, change your tips, hit your X bass button. A lot of things will close that gap. It's only a couple dB to where Olina is. So as I said, doesn't really need it, but a small boost really adds that depth, a very subtle amount of body and weight to the vocals, and that's exactly what I was going for with this mod. It does sound just a little bit bassier, and if you listen to Sam Smith's Perfect, that beginning part, just a hair bassier, but the real difference and what I was really going for is listen to the core of his voice, listen to her voice on Hames Right Now. Just need a little more dimension, a little more depth, a little more body, so it sounds more like a person, a body emanating that vocal as opposed to a recording, and that's what I was going for, not so much a big bass boost, which you can do as well. So one caveat, if it sounds in your head on Alanis Morissette's Ironic, the pairing is not right. And what actually happened was this showed up. So IFI lent me a Go Bar. So this is like a $300 dongle with 400 milliwatts of power. It is a super beefy dongle, but it basically turned the EA500 from a spectacular set into something average. And a lot of it came down to the soundstage was really decimated. It became really small. That song became in my head. It became a little more brighter, a little grainier. Very, very strange. I couldn't figure out what was going on. Same thing, the red versus black. I didn't notice red versus black making that all much of a difference. It sort of looks like the graph. But as soon as I heard the soundstage go away, I'm like, oh, I bet you there's some sources where it just doesn't pair well. And I think that's exactly what happened on Go Bar. So yeah, caveat, be really careful when you listen to it. Try a couple sources if it sounds really odd. I would definitely try a different source that you have. And also turn it up. I think at lower volume, and I would say the same exact thing about Olina, they tend to sound like inverted Vs at lower volume. And what that means is the bass and the treble tend to be tilted down a little bit at lower volumes. They're kind of hard to hear. The bass is a little bit more muddy. The treble isn't really present. And as you turn the volume up, it levels out into an almost neutral position. And from this point forward, it volume scales equally, and everything kind of comes up at the same time, at the same levels. And I would say the exact same thing about Olina. This one is very much the same thing. At lower volumes, it sounds very different, and you have to hit this point at which all the levels are in line. And from there, you can stop or move it even higher, and it sounds even better at volume scales in that way. But yeah, I would sort of caution if you are a low volume listener that it's not the best version of this set and sound at low volume. Sound-wise, warm, kind of slightly boosted neutral, natural, grounded in the mids, upper mids, like I said. Treble extension, this is a very extended set. There's a nice level of treble that you're going to hear it all the way out there. Playlist killer as long as you don't need super bass. You can EQ or mod. Will take you there, though. The bass actually cycles up very high. And again, the rest of this stuff, we're going to go through kind of quickly, and I'll talk about the main points, but a lot of the bits we've already covered. So the bass, like we talked about, this change in the bass shelf, you're either going to agree with it or you're not going to agree with it. I will tell you that the quality is there, the driver quality, performance, all that is right there. But will that lower bass level work with your playlist and what you prefer? That's the only thing I would really focus on. Take it as a given. I think people are saying this is an amazing set, maybe perhaps the best of this price. All that is sort of taken for granted that the quality is going to be there, but that doesn't really mean that it's going to work for your preferences and your playlist. So do focus on that a lot. And as I said, you can EQ or mod or do some other things to really get to it. So lots of, there aren't too many DDs that have that control and definition and texture. In this case, as I said, the quality is there. You just need to match your preference. Harry Styles Golden, nice level, control, definition, full range. And that's one of those tracks where you look at the spectrograph as it's playing, and it's sort of tilted downhill. It's got a heavy bass set and it extends all the way into upper treble. And sets that have kind of muddy bass, it's not fast enough. Sets that muddy up your mids, too much bleed. Sets that don't have enough treble. All those things sort of come across in that song, and it's pretty easy. It's actually a pretty hard song for dynamic drivers, just because you have to carry out into the upper treble enough so everything is clear and articulate, over the heavy bass, which is a sort of dominant part of that track. So the mids, natural dynamic driver sound, imaging, space, separation, clean, clear, natural level of details and resolution. This is not a detail king sound. I wouldn't say that about Olina either. It is a very natural presentation of detail and resolution. Not in your face. It's not a cold, analytic, hard, sharp, angled set. It is a very natural analog sounding set, just like Olina. And maybe it's a little brighter, this tuning, plus that quality driver really working together. And you hear that sort of almost immediately. The bass can thump, strings can have air, but there's no compromise in the mids. And it really lets the dynamic driver naturally shine through. Nothing forced, nothing really bumped out into an unnatural way. And I'll say, kind of going back to Olina, Sunny in 75, Indifference from Pearl Jam. I think Olina did the male energy better than EA500. As I said, EA500 definitely does the females a little bit better. And as I said, it kind of flips for females. But I think those tracks, two tracks that I really, really like on Olina, I don't like them as much. And a lot of it was the bass shelf. I still kind of prefer Olina's bass shelf, and that's why I tried to move EA500 towards Olina, and I kind of got most of the part there, at least enough there to start listening to it. But yeah, a lot of that mod and a lot of why I did it was exactly for that reason. But then when you listen to females, the whole thing really flips. That clarity and resolution and transparency are super noticeable on the EA500 with female vocals. As I said, Little Mix, No More Sad Songs, Little Me, their acoustic version, just really strong female vocals. And if you're paying attention, like I just talked about, it's really that Olina versus Oxygen sound. It's male versus female energy. Olina is very good at males, and I think this one kind of takes the cake on females just by giving you a little bit more energy in the treble. It just carries those female vocals and makes them very transparent and kind of noticeably energetic. Very, very cool on female vocals. Treble, this is, sounds energetic at volume, but it's really what you're expecting to hear on every one dynamic driver, and you rarely do. So as I was listening to this, I received a new KZ set, right? Another fantastic, legendary one dynamic driver, and I started poking at it and doing some mods to it. I'm like, hey, I think I'm pretty close to EA500. And then I picked up EA500, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, not even close. This thing does so many kind of small, subtle details. It's not again, it's this natural presentation of details and resolution. It's not those hard, big attack, sharp things. It's, hearing someone's voice trail off and the reverb and hearing the room acoustics, things that make it sound like that person's in a studio or in a room. Those small little things that tend to get cut out on budget sets, hearing them sort of all in their glory and having the extension, which really makes them audible and present. It's just doing all the things that you want every one dynamic driver to do, but they rarely do. So it does lean into the treble, and it's for people who really like to hear those top bits more than the bassy bits. It does favor that mid to upper range tracks. So Cheat Codes, One Night Left, just another set that actually looks like the Graph. That set sort of shifts. It's got some female vocals, but a lot of high frequency sounds. Plays very well on this because this one plays into that sound as well. But even if you go back to a more balanced track like Running with the Devil, Van Halen, just the right energy on guitars and cymbals. It's not overly boosted. It's not overly energetic. Definitely, I would call it energetic, but not boosted, kind of out of place. Doesn't overstep, but it's sort of, if you're used to Olina, it's sort of noticeably a little notch above. Stage, of course, lots of great tuning, lots of treble. You knew your stage was going to be very, very nice. Lots of space, lots of pinpoint imaging, kind of this seamless projection around your head. It can be wide or wider, and this one does what some other sets do. I wouldn't say on every track it sounds super wide, and I think that's kind of my impression was it's actually wide enough on almost most tracks, but then it goes wider, and that's why I sort of pointed out this track, Supertramp's Take the Long Way Home. a lot of that track sort of sounds out, hey, like this is a cool stage. And then you start hearing instruments move out and wider. And then you sort of get a sense that how this one projects sound and where it is around your head. It's very cool. So depth is more in front, and then it wraps around the back of your ears, very much an Olina thing. And I think Olina might be a hair bigger, but very, very close. So that is a long 20 minutes that we spent with EA500. But again, it is a surprisingly good set that competes with the best at the price range. Just a little bit different. You just have to figure out if it's for you and this balance works for you better than what maybe Olina did. So again, thank you guys again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.